Hey guys, in today's video I bring the impressive account of Selene Drayton, a woman who died, found Jesus, and came back with a terrifying vision about the Antichrist and the future of humanity. What she witnessed will challenge everything you believe. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to follow this transformative story. Let's get started. I was Selene Drayton, a 60-year-old woman who, to all eyes, had a perfect life. My house was the picture of a middle-class American family, a white picket fence around the garden, carefully planted flowers, and the constant smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting from the kitchen. George, my husband, had been my companion for more than 3 decades. Together we raised 3 children, all adults now, with their own lives. I lived surrounded by comfort and love, but still, something inside me was incomplete. From a young age, I was taught to love and trust God. My mother was devout, and church was part of our traditions. Christmas, Easter, weddings, baptisms, all of life's big moments were celebrated with prayer. But as time passed and the responsibilities of adult life took over, my faith took a back seat. Sundays were occupied with work meetings or preparing meals for the family. God knows I'm busy, I told myself, but the truth was I just didn't know how to connect with him anymore. George was practical and rational, the kind of man who offered stability but didn't believe much in the spiritual. He supported me in everything, but he never encouraged my spirituality. "You've always been good at following your heart," he said with a smile. "I think you're already doing your part." Although his words were comforting, they didn't fill the emptiness I felt. I wondered, in the silent moments, if I was really living as I should. My routine was structured, almost predictable. I would wake up early, take a light walk around the neighborhood, read the newspaper while drinking coffee, and spend the rest of the day doing chores or helping George with our small family business. When the children visited us, everything seemed in harmony. But when the house was empty, I had a nagging feeling, a question I couldn't answer. Is that all? At the time, I didn't realize it, but my life was far from full. Material success and superficial relationships masked my disconnection from what really mattered. It was as if I were living on a stage, playing a role, but not knowing what the true purpose of my existence was. I had no idea that soon, everything would change drastically and irreversibly. It was an ordinary day, like any other, until the pain started. At first, it was just discomfort in my upper abdomen, something I attributed to poor digestion. Maybe I overdid it at dinner last night, I thought, trying to ignore it. But the pain persisted, and days later, it got worse to the point that I had to see a doctor. After some tests, I was diagnosed with gallbladder stones. The solution was simple: surgery to remove the organ. "Nothing to worry about," the doctor said, with a reassuring smile. I trusted him. Surgery was scheduled for a week later. George accompanied me to the hospital that sunny morning. He held my hand as we waited in the prep room. "It'll be quick," he said, trying to ease my tension. "And after that, I can finally take you on that trip I promised." I smiled, grateful for his effort to distract me, but deep down, a subtle uneasiness came over me. It wasn't fear of the surgery itself, but a strange feeling, as if something bigger was about to happen. The procedure was completed with no apparent problems, and I was released to recover at home the next day. However, 3 days later, everything changed. I started to feel intense itching on my arms, which quickly evolved into red spots all over my body. My hands started to swell, and my breathing became heavy. At first, I thought it was something temporary, but within minutes, I realized it was getting worse. George, alarmed, ran into the bedroom. "Selene, are you okay?" He stopped when he saw my face, pale and covered in sweat. "I can't breathe," I whispered. He picked up the phone immediately and called 911 while trying to calm me down. "Stay with me, Selene. Help is on the way." But the feeling of suffocation increased, and the vision around me began to darken. I remember hearing the distant siren sound as George shouted something to the paramedics who quickly arrived. At the hospital, everything happened in a whirlwind. I saw doctors rushing around me, agitated voices and bright lights blinding me. My breathing became shallower, and the last thing I heard before everything disappeared was, "She's going into cardiac arrest. Let's try to revive her." Suddenly, everything went silent. There was no more pain, no more fear, just a deep emptiness, followed by an indescribable peace that seemed to envelop me completely. The moment my heart stopped, I was enveloped by absolute silence. There was no more pain, fear, or any physical sensation. I realized, with unsettling clarity, that I was no longer in my body. The emergency room felt like a distant movie scene as I floated above, taking in everything from a completely new perspective. I could see George in the waiting room, pacing back and forth with his cell phone in his hand, pressing it to his forehead in a gesture of desperation. He seemed to be talking to one of our children, his voice muffled by the glass in the door. In the center of the emergency room, doctors and nurses moved frantically around me. "Charge again. Let's try one more time." The phrase echoed as if it came from far away, mixed with the sound of machines beeping irregularly. I knew that body on the table was mine, but I didn't feel attached to it. There was no panic, just a quiet curiosity. It was strange to watch my husband, the medical personnel, and the chaos around me with complete serenity. It felt like the pain and anxiety were behind me, along with my physical body. Instead, I felt an indescribable lightness, as if I had freed myself from a weight I had carried for decades without realizing it. As he floated, something began to change. A soft, warm, and welcoming light began to envelop me, filling the entire space around me. It wasn't just light. It was as if it was composed of pure love, a feeling so overwhelming that it made everything I had ever experienced in life seem small and insignificant. I was drawn to this light, effortlessly, as if it were part of me. The closer I got, the more intense the sensation became. It was as if all of life's pains and worries were washed away, replaced by a peace I had never known. The emergency room slowly disappeared from view. The physical world seemed to dissolve, like a veil being pulled away. Now I was completely immersed in a different space, a place I couldn't describe with words. There was no more sound, form, or time. Just light, peace, and a deep sense that I was finally home. At that moment, I felt a presence. She wasn't visible, but she was as real as the air I breathed while alive. It was as if this presence knew everything about me, my flaws, my fears, my moments of joy and sadness, and yet accepted me completely. It was no ordinary presence. It was divine. As the presence became clearer, I was overcome with a feeling of awe and absolute love. In front of me, emerging from the light, was a figure that resembled no representation I had seen before. He did not wear elaborate robes, nor did he have an imposing appearance. It was simple, but at the same time majestic. Your eyes, oh, your eyes, they were like infinite oceans of compassion and wisdom. They pierced my soul, showing that they knew everything about me, every thought, every action, every omission. I knew who he was before any words were spoken. It was Jesus. There was no doubt. His presence emanated a love so pure and powerful that it made me feel both completely exposed and completely accepted. There was no need to say anything, because he spoke directly to my heart. Everything I had never understood or questioned now seemed to make sense. He knew all my flaws, all the times I chose selfishness over love, and yet there was no condemnation, just a deep love that enveloped me and healed me. He stepped forward and wordlessly conveyed a clear message. "It's not your time, Selene. There's still a lot to do." My first reaction was resistance. But why not? It's so wonderful here, so perfect. Why would I have to go back to the world where there is pain and struggle and loneliness? He smiled slightly, and for the first time I heard his voice, but not with my ears. It was as if the voice resonated directly within me, filling every corner of my being. "You were chosen to see and understand, but you must return to share. The world is in danger. Many are blind and lost. They need to hear the truth." My mind was fuzzy, trying to process what this meant. How true, I thought. Before I could ask, Jesus raised one of his hands, and a scene began to form around us. It wasn't just a vision. It was like I was experiencing it. Every scene he showed carried a lesson. It was like watching a story, but so vividly that it felt more real than anything I had ever experienced on earth. I knew something great was coming, but I could barely imagine what I would see. The feeling of being with him was both comforting and transformative. I wasn't the same anymore. Your words, your eyes, and your love were engraved in my soul forever. As soon as Jesus raised his hand, the welcoming light around us began to dissipate. In its place came a darkness so thick it seemed overwhelming. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was a living, pulsing darkness that seemed to have a mind of its own. The feeling of peace and security instantly disappeared, replaced by an overwhelming restlessness. I was in a completely opposite place to where I had come from. An intense cold ran through my soul, even though I no longer had a physical body. I looked around, trying to understand where I was. The air felt heavy, filled with an oppressive energy that brought to the surface all the fears and guilt I had buried throughout my life. I could hear screams in the distance, like wails that never stopped. Those screams weren't just sounds. They carried emotions, despair, regret, and pain so deep it was hard to bear. The feeling of abandonment and desolation was almost tangible. Jesus remained by my side, serene but serious. He knew I needed to see it. He didn't need to say anything for me to understand where he was. This was hell. But it wasn't like the images I had seen in paintings or heard in sermons. There were no flames or demons with tridents. This place was a prison of darkness and suffering, where each soul seemed trapped by the weight of their own choices and alienation from God. These souls are not here because they have been condemned by me, said Jesus, his voice resonating within me, firm but full of compassion. They chose this state by turning away from divine love. Hell is not just a place. It is the result of a life lived far from God and the truth. As he spoke, a vision began to form in the center of the darkness. I saw people in life, distracted, running after power, wealth, and momentary pleasures. Each seemed so focused on their ambitions that they didn't realize they were building, brick by brick, their own prison. A woman screamed, holding something invisible to her chest, as if trying to protect her possessions, even in death. A man walked in circles, repeating words of regret to himself, but never looking up. My heart hurt when I saw that. I remembered moments in my own life when I distanced myself from love, putting other priorities before God. Can this be avoided? I asked with a sinking heart. Jesus looked at me, his eyes filled with loving sadness. Yes, but they must choose the path of love and truth while they are still on earth. The darkness around us began to dissipate, and the screams gradually fell silent. Before the vision completely disappeared, I heard Jesus say, "Now you know what's at stake. There is still more to see." After witnessing the inferno, I was once again enveloped by a soft light, but this time it grew quickly, illuminating everything around me. The darkness and heaviness of the previous place were replaced by a peace so intense that I could barely contain my tears. The light felt alive, as if each ray carried pure, unconditional love. I was being transported to a place that transcended everything I understood as real. When the light dissipated, I found myself in a place of indescribable beauty. It was as if creation itself was alive. There were lush gardens, with colors I had never seen before, hues so vivid they seemed to resonate within me. Crystal clear rivers snaked through the scenery, their waters sparkling like liquid diamonds. The air was filled with angelic music, but it wasn't just something you heard. It was something you felt, as if each note was a reminder of divine love and perfection. Walking through this place, I felt a joy I had never experienced before. It wasn't just happiness. It was the feeling of being complete, of being in the place where I was always supposed to be. Every step felt like a hug, every sight a declaration of love. It was then that I noticed an even larger presence approaching. It was different from the presence of Jesus, but equally powerful. As the light around me intensified, a majestic figure emerged. I knew who he was without needing an introduction. God the Father. His presence was so vast, so infinite, that I felt small, but not in an insignificant way. It was as if I were an essential part of something immensely larger. God did not use words to speak to me. His communication was pure, straight to the heart. He showed me the importance of love and truth, and how humanity, in its daily rush, was moving away from him. "Awaken, my children," he transmitted. "Time is short, deception is near, and many are asleep." As God spoke, visions began to form around me. I saw people coming together in prayer, bringing light to the world, but I also saw others, immersed in selfishness and distraction, blind to what was coming. He showed me how love could transform the world, but also how its absence could lead to destruction. When the vision ended, God the Father walked away, but not before delivering his last message. "You must return and share what you have seen. Your mission is to awaken those who can still hear." I knew at that moment that my journey was far from over. Heaven was perfect, but I had a purpose to fulfill on earth. Before I could protest or ask to stay, I felt my being pulled back. As the celestial light began to fade, I realized that I was not being taken back to my body yet. Instead, I was led to a new vision. The peace and love that filled the sky were gradually replaced by an unsettling feeling, as if something dark was approaching. Around me, the scenery formed, revealing a world that I immediately recognized as ours, but in total chaos. I saw natural disasters on an unprecedented scale, devastating hurricanes, massive wildfires, and earthquakes that toppled entire cities. At the same time, nations were mired in conflict, wars were breaking out in all corners of the globe, and fear reigned among people. It was as if the earth itself was screaming in pain. It was in this scenario of despair that he appeared. At first he seemed like an ordinary man, but something about him instantly attracted attention. He had a magnetic presence, a charisma that made everyone around him turn to him for guidance. Dressed elegantly and speaking with unwavering confidence, he emerged as a leader amid the chaos, offering solutions to the world's problems. "I will bring peace," he said in speeches to crowds. His words were like honey, sweet and irresistible. I saw leaders of nations reaching out to him, trusting in his promises to restore order. He spoke of global unity, of a new era of prosperity, and people revered him as a savior. I saw crowds cheering, crying, and proclaiming his name as if he were the answer to all their prayers. But as I watched, I noticed something terribly wrong. Beneath the surface of his smile and charisma, there was an indescribable darkness. Jesus was at my side again, and in a grave tone, he said, "He will come in my name, but his heart is set on destruction." The vision has changed. I saw this man centralizing global power, uniting economies, governments, and religions under a single system. He promised peace, but used technology to monitor and control people, taking away their freedom in the name of false security. I saw families being separated, people disappearing, and those who resisted being labeled as enemies of peace. Then Jesus spoke again. "He deceives because the world seeks a human savior, but forgets to seek the truth in God." It was at that moment that I fully understood. This was the Antichrist, a figure who seemed to offer light, but brought only darkness. When the vision ended, I felt the weight of what I had witnessed. What I had seen was not just a warning, it was a responsibility. I needed to warn others, help awaken those who were still blind to what was coming. As the vision of the Antichrist began to fade, I felt an irresistible force pulling me. The light around me became dimmer, and a feeling of heaviness began to approach, as if my spirit was being compressed again within my physical body. The transition was abrupt and uncomfortable. I didn't want to go back. The sky was perfect, and everything made sense there, but I knew my mission was not complete. Suddenly I woke up with a start, as if I had been pulled from a deep dream. The first thing I felt was the cold of the environment. I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines that monitored my vital signs. The feeling of being in my body again was heavy and claustrophobic. It was as if I had been boxed into a space that was too small for everything I had experienced. I heard voices around me. "She's coming back," a nurse exclaimed with relief. The sound seemed distant, almost muffled, as my senses slowly adjusted to physical reality. George was at my side, holding my hand tightly. When our eyes met, I saw tears streaming down his face. "Selene, thank God," he said, pressing my hand to his chest. I wanted to comfort him, tell him I was okay, but I was still processing everything I had experienced. I didn't know where to start. The image of heaven, hell, and the Antichrist was burned into my mind like fire. God's love still seemed to pulse within me, but now it was mixed with an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I needed to do something with what I had learned. But how? How can we explain something so immense, so supernatural? George didn't stop talking. Excited. "They said we lost you for a few minutes, Selene." "God," I thought you'd never come back to me." He cupped my face in his hands, his expression mixing relief and concern. "Are you okay? Do you remember anything?" I hesitated. How could I begin to explain something so profound? It wasn't time. Not yet. With difficulty, I whispered, "I'm here." It was a miracle. He hugged me tightly, relieved by my response. But inside I knew that what I had experienced could not be kept. It was like a flame burning, demanding to be shared. The responsibility of warning others was already a weight on my heart, but it was also a clear mission that I knew I had to fulfill. In the days following my return, my life seemed the same as before, but something inside me had changed irrevocably. Every detail of the physical world seemed smaller, more insignificant, compared to the immensity of what I had experienced. I woke up in the hospital under the relieved eyes of doctors and nurses who commented on the miracle of my recovery. George held my hand as if he didn't want to lose me again, but even as we talked, my mind was flooding with the visions and messages I had received. Back home, the routine seemed to invite me to return to my old life, but that was impossible. Every corner of my house, every silent moment, seemed to call me to reflect on the mission that God and Jesus had placed upon me. The words still echoed in my mind. Awaken my children. Time is short. However, starting over was not easy. Where would I start? How could I explain something so immense and supernatural to people who have never experienced anything like it? George tried to support me, but he was clearly confused. During breakfast, he looked up at me from the newspaper and asked cautiously, "Celine, you've been so thoughtful lately. Was it something that happened there, at the hospital?" I wanted to respond clearly, but words failed me. "Yes," he said simply, stirring his cup of tea. "It was something that changed everything." He frowned, clearly worried, but decided not to press. George was a practical, concrete man, and what I needed to tell him was far beyond anything he could easily understand. At first, I started discreetly. I started visiting the local church, something I hadn't done in years. I sat in the last pew, watching and listening but feeling a growing discomfort. The sermons spoke of hope and love, but avoided the harshest truths, the ones I knew the world needed to hear. During a community meeting, I stood up for the first time and shared some of my experience. I spoke of heaven, of God's love, and of hell as a state of divine estrangement. Some people listened attentively, while others looked at me skeptically. "Do you really believe you've seen heaven and hell?" asked one woman after the meeting. "And Jesus?" There was disbelief in her voice. I smiled softly and replied, "I don't believe it. I know, because I lived it." As the weeks went by, I began organizing small prayer groups in my home, bringing together those who were willing to listen. I told them about God's love, about the urgency of reconnecting with faith, and about the importance of spiritual vigilance. Little by little, my circle of listeners began to grow, and my message began to reach more people. Still, I knew the biggest challenge was yet to come, talking about the Antichrist and what he represented. My mission became clearer and clearer as time went on. The visions I received could not be ignored. The love of God, the danger of hell, and the revelation of the Antichrist were like a burden on my soul, something I needed to share, even though I knew I would face resistance. It was as if my near-death experience had given me a second life, but this new life was no longer mine. I was a messenger, charged with awakening those who were still lost. Initially, I started by sharing the lightest part of my experience, the sky. It was easier to talk about God's incomparable beauty, infinite love, and peace that passes all understanding. People were thrilled to hear about the heavenly music and lush gardens, but when I tried to bring up hell or the Antichrist, the mood changed. Some were uncomfortable, while others were doubtful. "That sounds like a story to scare children," I once heard, but I knew I needed to keep going. My house became a meeting point for those who were thirsty for something deeper. We organized prayer and reflection meetings, where we shared biblical passages and I told my story. During these meetings, I saw people beginning to change. Some, who were previously far from God, began to pray and seek spiritual answers. It was as if a light was being turned on in their hearts. However, talking about the Antichrist was the biggest challenge. I knew I needed to warn people about what I had seen. A charismatic leader who would deceive the entire world with promises of peace and prosperity. I explained that he would emerge in times of chaos, when people were desperate for hope, and that his true intention would be to lead humanity to destruction. He will come in the name of peace, but his heart will be turned to darkness, I said, repeating the words that Jesus had transmitted to me. Although many believed in my experience, and others rejected the idea. "Why would God show you this and not someone more important?" asked a man during a meeting. "I'm just a servant," I replied, "and maybe he chose an ordinary person like me to show that this message is for everyone." Over time, my message began to reach more people. I was invited to speak at churches and community meetings, and even on small local radio shows. Each time I shared my story, I felt the urgency increase. The world seemed to continue toward the chaos I had seen in my vision, with natural disasters, political divisions, and crises that only strengthened my conviction that the Antichrist was approaching. My mission was not just to warn of danger, but also to remind people of the transformative power of God's love. Love is the key, I often said. It is the only weapon we have against deception and darkness. If we live in love and spiritual vigilance, we will be prepared for whatever comes. I still face challenges. Not everyone accepts what I have to say, and I often feel the weight of my mission. But no matter how hard it is, I know I'm not alone. God's presence continues with me, guiding me, strengthening me, and reminding me that no matter how much darkness tries to prevail, the light will always be more powerful. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.